Good evening, this is Daniel with Brushy Mountain Bee Farm, and today we are live streaming on Facebook our extraction process. The other week I was actually out with my hives recording the data from my broodminder device, my hive scale, and it showed that I was starting to lose weight. So I reacted, went out there, and I gathered up all the honey that I could. Basically what that means is my bees are starting to consume. There's no resource out there for them, so they're starting to consume what they've stored up. So me robbing my honey, now that I've done that, I'm also out there feeding. Sugar water, corn syrup, fondant, all great resources that will build up their food stores to carry them through winter. But today, we've got two supers here. Again, they were starting to feed, so some of these supers may not be completely full. That's okay. But what I did when I was out there, and this is a good field test for anybody that's pulling off honey supers, is when you remove some of your frames and you see that, well, they're already purpless together. This is why one of these little mini hive tools come in handy. So when you're out in the field and you see something like this where beautifully capped over, all that nice comb right there filled with honey that's being cured, but then down here, not too sure. Is it cured? Is it ready? And what I mean by cured is all that moisture content that's built up there from the nectar storing, it's been evaporated. So in the field, one of the tests that a lot of people try to do is the shake test. And you simply take your frame like this, you hold it over your hive like this, and you do a couple quick jerks. And if you see nectar on top of these frames, that means that there's too much moisture in that honey and you shouldn't extract it. With extracted honey with high moisture levels, what that means is sooner or later it's going to ferment and you're going to have some fermented honey. Yeah, it may not be tasting good, but as soon as you consume a lot of that stuff, you will be feeling good. So I did the shake test. I saw that it wasn't too moist in there. Another good test when you get back to your honey house is for those cells that are still open, use a refractometer. Your refractometer is going to give you precise measurements. And to use a refractometer, comes with a little vial here. Just scoop out some of this honey. Smear it on there, kind of get a good coating, and then this clear cover right there, push that down. I don't know if you can see it or not, but you can see where I've pressed down onto that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to look through this eyepiece right here. And right now, you won't be able to see this, but my moisture content is about 17.5. If it's anywhere up above 19.5, what you want to do is you can put it back onto your hive, let them continue working that. It's not cured at that point in time, or you can kind of let it set in an open room and hopefully that will begin to evaporate. But with it above 19.5, I don't want to go in and extract it, again, fermented honey. So I've just got a reading on that. I've used my refractometer, I've used the in-field test, so now I know that my honey is good to extract. But before I extract it, some of the key things that I want to point out that you've got to be fully aware of when you're dealing with frames of honey is you've got two key essential things here. These cappings and the comb itself. And what I mean by that, these cappings right there, once we remove those off, you'll see how beautiful and white those can be. If you're ever into candle making, soap making, or any other craft supplies, that capping right there is what you want to keep and what you want to melt down to go into those crafts. The comb itself, I don't want to mutilate this comb to the point where I can't take it back out to my bees and they can reuse it. If I start scratching in there and messing this up, those bees are going to have to do so much work to repair what damage I've done, and it's basically like them starting over. They've put a lot of time, effort and a lot of materials into building out this comb. Don't mess it up for them. So those are the two key things that I wanted to point out. Now we can start to talk about some of the tools that we can use, some of the easy so that you don't create a muck and mess out of your honey frames. Some of the tools for uncapping, we've got our capping scratcher. The name alludes to actually scratching, but I'll show you the better way to use it. We've got a rolling uncapper here. We've got a cold knife. And then we've got a hot knife. This is plugged in. If you're using a hot knife, be sure not to touch it because it is hot. Now there are other resources out there that you can use to uncap your frames. We've got the standard plane that you can use. We've got the Speed King uncapping knife. To the point that, I mean, if you want to something like this, use a standard fork in your house or a serrated knife. In my past, I've used somewhat of a fish fillet knife and just seared down the edges. So you've got resources you can use at home, but these tools definitely make the job easy. Now that's for uncapping, but what's going to capture those cappings? Well, this is what I like to use. It's called our multi-use straining system, and you've got your bar right here that your frames rest on with this nail in the center. And so as you begin to uncap it, those cappings fall down into here. There's this lining in here that's a mesh bag. So those cappings that fall down, those are going to contain honey, and that honey is going to seep down through that mesh bag. And then the bottom bucket down here, you can look up front, it has a honey gate on it. So if I'm doing a lot of frames, 30, 40 frames that I'm trying to uncap, those cappings are going to fall down here and that honey seeping through. And I may get another pint jar out of just what I just uncapped. So always hold on to those cappings because there's honey attached to it, plus the cappings can be used later on. If you don't have the multi-use straining system, there's other tools that you can use. Get yourself a 5-gallon bucket and this ultimate uncapper right here. Again, same concept. Your frame sits right into here, locks into place. You uncap, your cappings fall down into here. Now again, if you want to have that fall right into the bucket, that's perfectly fine. Or you can get this mesh bag to put down into that bucket. So get yourself a mesh bag, put it down into that bucket. Put your ultimate uncapper on there. And again, your cappings fall down in there, and then you're left with the cappings in the bag and the honey in the bucket. It's a great source. So stepping from there, we've just uncapped our frames. Now we can go into the extraction process, and we've got multiple types of extractors. We've got our compact extractor right here, which is a tangential extractor. You put your frames in with head facing head, and as you put it in there and start to turn it, that honey's being flung to the outside of the extractor. You can see here being tangential, it's only extracting one side of the frame. So once I've extracted that one side, I'll flip them over and extract the other side. Then we've got our radial. Our radial range from a 9 frame all the way up to a 27 frame. Our radial extractors are all, except for the 9 frame, we have a hand crank there, but most of the other ones are motorized. Motorized makes the job so much easier. You put your frames in here, you've got your control panel here to operate it, you start it, you can walk away and continue to uncap your other frames. This is 9 frame, this is what we're going to use. So that's kind of an overview of all the equipment that we have. Let's go ahead and hop in to how we uncap our frames. Again, you can see here, not all of them are fully capped over. We've done our shake test, we've done our refractometer, we know that we're good. Now, let's look at the tools to use. Capping scratcher. I mentioned that it alludes to scratching. And I see this so many times, and I wish, you know, people didn't do this, because it just, it tears up the comb that your bees have built out. They'll go through and they'll just scrape it and cut up that comb. The real intent to this is to get underneath that comb and pry it up. So get underneath that comb and pry it up. And what that do is holding the integrity of the cell so my bees can use it later on. And all I'm getting is the cappings. If I were to go in and scrape this, I'm not getting any of those cappings at that point. And those cappings is something that I like to use later on. I like to make lip balm with it. And the amount that I get out of it will actually do me about 48 tubes. From one super, or what I've seen. So again, you can see that I just focused on those cells that were capped over. I didn't get all the way up into here, so now at this point, I'm going to, kind of awkward angle, but just do some refining touch-ups, just to make sure that all of those cells are uncapped. And the other thing to note as you're doing this, you've got to imagine all these cells that are being capped completely full. All these other cells, it's a hit or miss. They may be full, they may be just barely a little bit of nectar in there, or the cured honey. So take that into note when you're loading up your extractor, because the main thing with loading up an extractor is you want it to be even. If that centrifugal force is off in the least little bit, that extractor is going to walk. So we've got a frame here, fully capped over, and that's how we use the capping extractor. I should have mentioned this at the beginning. This is a live feed, so please chime in with any questions you may have. If you think I'm doing something wrong, or you have further questions how I'm doing it, ask away. We're here to answer those questions for you. So that's our capping scratcher. It's messy at this point, so I'm going to leave it in my multi-use system right here. And I'm going to move on to another tool, just so that you can see how everything's done. So with this tool right here, what I'm doing is I'm puncturing holes in those cells. And so if I just go up like this in one smooth motion, all I've essentially done right here is follow the path of that puncture, and I'm not getting every single cell. So if you're using the rolling uncapper, don't go in one motion. Use multiple different motions, ensuring that you are getting all those cells uncapped. And you can see that it's starting to break apart that comb, which is fine. You know, you don't have to worry about the cappings if you're just interested in the honey. So I've used this quick, easy, especially if your frame is fully capped over. You can quickly go through, and all you're doing is puncturing those holes. Now, I always like to keep my capping scratcher handy, because you can see up here, I wasn't able to puncture those, so I can just come back in and get those real quick. And what I'm ensuring right now is that once I'm done extracting, I'm done extracting. I don't have to extract for 5 minutes, come back in, and then use my tools again to finish off those capped cells. Again, quick and easy. Multiple different directions. And again, come back in with my capping scratcher. So something else that you'll notice is that it's not all perfectly even across. So it would be nice, it would make life so much easier if it was, but these little dimples right here where my rolling uncapper didn't get to, that's where I have to do my main focus with my capping scratcher here. So up into this area. Now, so that's two tools. Let's begin to look at some other tools. So this is our cold knife. It's basically just a serrated knife. And one of the main things that you need to focus on with this knife is you don't want to dig too deep. It's very easy to dig too deep, and sooner or later you're going to start hitting into the wood frames and tear those up. So the core concept here is we're basically just sawing down the frame and cutting those cappings right off. And come back in and hit the low parts. And I'll come back in with my capping scratcher and finish it up. Again, not all frames are going to be perfectly even across. You're going to have dips and high points. So when you come in with a cold knife or even the hot knife, you're not going to get every single cell, which is okay. That's why we have other tools. So that's got this pretty much covered. Again, I'll come back in and hit these few quick cells real quick. And as we continue down this process, one of the other things to note is who you're doing this for. Are you doing this just for your own personal gain? This is your honey, or are you doing this for the end consumer? If you're doing it for the end consumer, always take into consideration sanitation. Wash your hands if you feel more comfortable wearing gloves, making sure all your equipment is kept clean. Keeping your equipment clean is beyond sanitation, because that little bit of honey right there is going to drive in other pests, other insects into here. So once we're done, what you want to do with your equipment, once you've uncapped it, is cooled off if it's a hot knife, but you also want to go back in and rinse it off with cold water first. Always use cold water first, because you're going to have wax on that tool. And if you use hot water, that wax is going to melt down onto that tool, and it's going to be harder to get off. So this is our hot knife here. You can see that it's very similar in that we kind of use this sawing motion. And you can see kind of where I went a little bit too slow up here. You've got to maintain a good steady speed. If you leave it there, it'll start to melt that wax down into that honey, which is, it's not a bad thing. It'll still sling it out, but you definitely don't want to leave that as is. We'll go in and we'll clean that up just a little bit more. So again, good sawing motion. If I can get in there. when you're done with the hot knife, there is a plate that comes with it. Just make sure that you put it back onto that plate. It's a hot device. If you put it down onto your table, you could scorch your table. So again, same concept. We're going to come back in here. It's just that center of the frame wasn't perfectly even. But all in all, each tool you see is fairly easy to do. It's just, when you look at it, look at your time and resources into this. Do you want something fast? Do you want your cappings to be kept? If you're looking for speed, the hot knife is the way to go. If you're looking for cappings, I would either use the cold knife or the capping scratcher. If you're looking for speed without the cappings, the rolling uncapper is the way to go. So we've got 5 frames here. Now I'm going to start loading them into my extractor. We're going to be using this extractor right here. It's our 9-frame radial extractor, and you can see that we've already used it. This, we do a lot of honey in here, so we sling a lot of honey. So we're going to start putting our frames in here. And when you put your frames in here, you put with the top bar towards the outside. If you've ever noticed a frame, when the bees draw out the frame, that comb is always at a slight angle. So with that slight angle, am I caught on something? With that slight angle that the bees have it at, that top bar is going, the cells are pointing out towards the top bar. So when we put it in here, if the cells were pointed the other way, that honey wouldn't fling out. So with it put in here like this, the cells are pointed towards the outside, so when it slings it around, that honey's being flung out. Let's get a couple more frames in here. There's a little piece of comb down there. Okay, there we go. And if I had only done the number of frames that I just did, then I would want to load this a little bit more evenly. You can see that there's 3 sections here with 3 frames in each. Let's just do 6 frames so that everybody can see this process. So I'd load them like this. Because you got to think of that centrifugal force, and as that spins around, you want it to be loaded in there evenly. And it might not set in right away, but once that extractor starts going, it's going to lock into that position right there. And for whatever you do, whatever you wear, just anticipate stickiness. You're not going to get by that. And just a quick little thing that I just noticed when I was doing this, I had a little nut pop off here. This rolling uncapper has a nut at the end of it that you can loosen out, and you can take this roller right off and break it apart. and wash each individual piece once you're done with the full process. And it looks like we just didn't tighten it good enough. So we got our frames in there. So the other thing that you want to take into consideration is the weight of the frames. Not every frame is going to be equal. So this one looks light, that one looks heavy, that one looks heavy. So I'm just going to rotate these two real quick. And put that right there. And then that one. Right there. Okay. Do a couple quick spins to make sure that everything is rotating well. Make sure that a frame, I put it in there appropriately. If the frame was to pop out, that little bit of resistance will cause the extractor to stop. And so everything's in there, everything's looking good. My frames are evenly spaced, so now I'm ready to begin extraction. As you can see, the extractor right here is concave down in there. The honey's going to be flowing to the outside. It's going to start seeping down, and then it's going to end up down here at this honey gate. One of the key things that you need to do while you're extracting is, first, open up the honey gate. And there's probably honey in it. And second, filter while you're extracting. Do 2 steps in one. We've got the honey coming out. We have it running through this filter. And again, there's multiple different types of filter. This is our stainless steel. It actually is embedded with 2 filters. I would say that this is probably 800 micron, and maybe this is down to 300 micron. But those microns, what that's doing is it's filtering out the comb that's going to be popping out. Maybe there's pollen in there. Maybe there's a few dead bees. You know, there's stuff that's going to be coming out with your honey. It's not going to be clean and pure. That filter is doing that, cleaning that up for you. So you got this type of filter. You also have these types of filters. And these filters, again, fit right down into a 5-gallon bucket. I usually don't go down to 200 micron. The reason I don't go down to 200 micron is I like to still see some of that pollen grain in there. That pollen is what I see as the true health benefit from honey. So I at least go down to a 400. If not, keep it at a 600. But what we're going to do is we're going to use the stainless steel. Again, it's easy for us to clean that up. This will accommodate any size bucket. Moves in and out. Make sure that it's just kind of locked in position. We open up our honey gate. And then now we can begin the extraction process. For your extractor, no matter how well you are with Tetris or stacking things up, you're always going to have it a little bit off kilter, and it is going to walk a little bit for you. So what we typically recommend is if you've got a pallet or if you've got a wooden slab, or maybe your honey house accommodates this where you can drill down into the floor. But if you look down at the bottom of the extractor on the legs are holes. Lock it down. Make sure that it stays stable and it doesn't begin walking for you. Because once we start this up, you'll actually see that extractor begin to walk a little bit. Again, this is a motorized, powered extractor. Some of the features here, the motor's right on top. Also on the hinge right here is what is the safety mechanism. I don't know how many times I've seen this where people have this lid open and they're looking down in there and they rest their hands on there and one of the frame catches their thumb. We see this too often, so we have the safety mechanism in place so that when you're extracting, this green lever folds out over that, prevents you from lifting up this lid. Because if you close that, it kills the motor, and if you open that, the braking unit engages and it stops the extraction process. So we want that in place so that clear lids we can see down in there, but we want to keep all of our limbs safe. So now we're going to come over to the control panel. Between our 9 frame and our 21 frame, the control panel is going to be a little bit different. We've got the on and off switch. You've got your speed variation right here. You got your rotation variation right there to spin it clockwise or counterclockwise. And then this stop button is your start and stop button. You can see here that this dial right here is going to read your speed. This is our 9 frame control box. If you want to step over, let me just point out our 18 frame or our 21 frame and 27 frame control box because they're a little bit different. This is our 21 frame control box right here. Again, it's got the speed dials right there that you can increase and decrease, your rotation right there, but it's got the start button and it's got a different locking unit. This locking unit is a locking unit on the lid. So when you open that lid and close that lid, you need to make sure that that locking unit, that key right here, is in place. If it's not locked in, it will not begin. You'll actually hear it click, and then it will read an error up here. So make sure that that's in place. And then you've got your time right here. So with the 21 and the 27 frame extractor, you've got 4 different programs. 2 of which are automated. One does a 2-cycle, one does a 4-cycle. And when I mean cycles, it rotates one way for 30 seconds, 300 seconds, and then it rotates the opposite way for 300 seconds. That is 2 different cycles right there. So one way is 1 cycle, rotates the other way, that's another cycle. So you can go up to a max of 4 cycles with the programs. The other programs allows you to set the speed and allows you to set the time per cycle that you have. So it's a little bit more complex, but again, this is for those high-end extracting projects that you can set it, you can set the programs, you don't have to worry about stepping in, rotating the directions. So that control box is a little bit more complex, but again, depending on your size of operation, that may be what you want to go for. For us, for the 2 supers that we've had here that we're extracting, honestly, if I just had the 2 hives, I may just stick with my compact. But once I get up to that 8 to 10 hives, even up to 15 hives, then I'm going to start to look at my 9 frames. And if I get above that, 20, 25, 18 frame, 50 hives, 21 frames, 100 hive, 27 frames, look at your budget, and then look at the time that you're going to be spending. You saw how much time that I spent just uncapping. Now imagine including an additional 10, 15 minutes for uncapping. Time I spent uncapping, 10, 15 minutes for extraction as well. So time and your budget is what you need to look into. And don't plan for now, plan for the future. If you have 2 hives now, maybe in 2 years you might have 30 hives. Always plan for that. All right, locked and loaded. So let's go ahead and start the cycle. Again, I like to always start off slow just to ensure that my frames are engaged, everything's going well. If I start to hear that means a frame is loose in there and I need to stop it and look to observe what's going on. Start it off slow because you can gradually speed it up. And if you can listen very carefully, you can start to hear that honey being slung against the side of the extractor. Looking down in here, I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but the edges, they're starting to glisten with that nice, beautiful honey. Nothing's happening yet down there. Let's knock it up some in speed. So you can see it starting to wobble a little bit. If I were to let it go, it would probably wobble a little bit more. That's because I don't have it bolted down. Again, I tried to evenly space out my frames in there, but you never know. I may have done it incorrectly. sure that everything's running okay. I see the honey in there, it's nice and pretty. Nothing's coming out yet. That's not a bad sign. It's just got to settle down in there. If it starts to wobble on you a little bit, slow it down a little bit, because even right now, honey's being extracted out. So that just means one of those frames is a little bit heavy. Slowing it down allows for it to extract out a little bit more, so it gets it a little bit even. And then we can increase the speed. So we're taking it down to a slow speed. We're going to stop it. At this point, looking down in there, that honey's down in there is starting to drain out. You can see in here those little flakes of wax in there. That's the stuff that we don't want to see down into our honey. So that's what these filters are catching right now. So I've extracted one process, meaning I've gone clockwise with this. I'm going to rotate directions. And I'm going to start the extracting process again. I could leave it being a radial extractor going one direction for a long period of time, and that would suffice. But I always like to rotate it in the opposite direction, just because I want to capture as much honey as I can. There might be those occasional cells that need that rotation. So you can see that it's starting to filter down. What's down below that is some really pretty honey. It doesn't have the flakes of wax in there. So it's a two-part filtration system. And then once you go below that, it is some nice pretty honey. So again, look at who you're extracting for. If this is for your own personal pleasure, then at this point in time, I would say go in, do your taste test. Dip your finger in there, taste away. if you're extracting to sell, you got to think of sanitation when it comes to that. But it is some pretty honey. If I wanted to, again, this is just for my personal use, but if I wanted to, there are resources out there. Texas A&M is a great resource that I can send my honey off to figure out what the floral content is in that. If I wanted to check to see if this was sourwood, maybe it's clover, maybe it's, you know, it's too light to be anything else like tulip poplar or something like that. But if I wanted to know so that I can market my honey in a particular method, if this is truly sourwood, I want to label it sourwood and get that premium price. But for me to know that, I would have to send it off to get it tested. I think we usually send ours off to Dr. Von Bryant down at Texas A&M, and he gets us our results back, and it's so interesting to figure out what's actually in your honey. A lot of times I'll actually see poison ivy in there, but more often than not, it's a lot of clover, it's a lot of sourwood, which is what I like to see. So during the extraction process, as I mentioned, it's slinging the honey to the outside. So I can look down in here to my edges and I can see if any more honey's being formed. At this point in time, it's not. So I know that my frames are actually done. I slow it down, I bring it to a stop. I open it up. And the next thing that I want to do, leave that still draining out, is I like to pop it out. And see, I don't know what tool I used here, but those cells right there, those are still good for extraction. Those cells up there, all through here. So there's still a lot of honey in there that needs to be extracted. So what I can do, I like to always save these kind of as a last step measure, just because I got another super and a couple more frames in here. I'll set those to the side, wait until my final steps. Yeah, that one's beautifully done. This one I know was done with the hot knife. So I'll put that back into the super right there. I think this one was done with a cold knife. You can always tell kind of what tool you use. You know, coming back to this one, it's not very pretty how it's uncapped. And you can see the puncture holes in there as well. So I knew I used my rolling uncapper for that frame. Again, still a lot of honey in there. So let's just imagine that we are done with our whole extracting process. You can see that there's a lot of honey still left in there that's needing to be drained out. If time is of the essence, you can see it's concave down towards that honey gate, so I can lift it up, pushing more honey towards that end. But it's always nice to have a rubber spatula on hand as well, because once I get down to the very nitty-gritty bottom of it, I'll take this rubber spatula here and start to scrape down the sides, pushing it down. But you also have to consider, and leaving the set for a while is a good option, because all of the sides are still covered in honey, and that honey continues to drain down. So again, with the lid, I like to shut it, put this over it, and let it set for at least 24 hours while it's continuing to filter through there and while it's being drained out. And then I'll go in and I'll start to scrape it out. And again, this down here, what you see here is cappings. Hold on to those, melt those down into a wax block. Use it later on for something else, candles, lip balms, soaps, whatever you want to use. Always hold on to the resources. Once I actually let this filter through, you'll notice air bubbles in that honey as well. I don't want to go direct to bottling. I want to let it set for a long time, let those air bubbles rise up out of the honey that it's captured into. Because if I put it into bottles, immediately those air bubbles are still in there, and now I've just gypped my customer that I'm selling it to by whatever volume that air bubble takes out. So let those air bubbles rise. The other thing that you can do at this point in time, if you want to, if you didn't do the step previously with the refractometer, this is all homogenized now. So maybe that one frame, if I check my refractometer and it was at the brink of 19.5%, then once it's been homogenized in the extractor and it's now down in my bucket, I'll do another test just to ensure that, yeah, that one frame 19.5, but the other frame at 17, they've just now meshed together, and now I'm at 17.5 or 18 or whatever it is at that point in time. So if you're always concerned about that moisture level within your honey, after the fact, just go back in and double check. I'm going to let this set, continue to set. This was a Facebook live feed session, so you can always come back to it, reference it on our Facebook page. But if you do have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We do have a question. Is there a potential for the hot knife or heat planer to cook the honey it comes in contact with? There is that potential. If I let that sit there, I'm more concerned about the wax that it's touching. That wax starts to melt down faster than the honey will heat up. But again, imagine honey heating up. I'm taking all those nutritional elements out of it as it's heating up. And the other thing you can actually see on the hot knife itself, now that it's cooled down a little bit, some of the brown on there, if I turn it over, that's all wax mixed in with honey. So it's definitely heating up that honey, but it's not really a concern for the honey. It's more of a concern for the wax itself. The question that I see on here, is that costly to check your honey? That's why I threw in that field test. That field test of any of those open cells, taking your frame, taking it and just slinging it up against the top of your hive. First, if it is the moisture content too high, you'll see droplets on there. Second, you're flinging it up against the top of your frame, so the bees are still going to be able to use those resources. If I take it to the side and fling it on the grass, then I'm just drawing in predators. So always fling it to the top of the frames. That's an in-field test. It's not a true test, but if you're looking for efficient cost, that's a good test. Other thing that you need to be cautious of, that's only testing. Where's my mini hive tool? That's only testing those open cells. If you've got nice, pretty closed cells, that means that honey is cured. You don't have to worry about it at that point in time. Really, it's just I wanted to test to make sure that those open cells were cured to the point that I could extract. All right. Again, this was a live Facebook feed. I appreciate the audience for viewing in, listening in, and posting those questions. Again, if you've got more questions, give us a call, 1-800-233-7929, 1-800-BEESWAX. Email us, info@BrushingMountainBeeFarm.com. We monitor our Facebook page, so continue asking questions. Send us a direct response. And again, if there's future videos that you guys want to see that we can post for you, please let us know. We're here to educate you. We're passionate about bees, and we want to help you succeed. But I do thank you guys for listening in, watching. Reach out to us for any future questions.